Fidelity report from 2024 found that the number of 401k millionaires in America had reached an all-time high. The financial press ran with it. The message was clear. More people than ever are crossing the finish line. What the headlines did not mention is that this record number represents about 2.5% of American retirement savers. Most people absorb that kind of statistic and feel one of two things: either reassured that the milestone is achievable, or quietly unsettled that they are not closer to it. What almost nobody stops to ask is whether the milestone itself still means what it used to, whether a number that became the cultural benchmark for retirement security in the 1980s still delivers the same outcome in the economy you are actually retiring into. Because here is what shifted without a public announcement. The dollar got substantially weaker. The cost of healthcare in retirement is substantially higher. The benchmark never moved. So the real question is not whether $1 million is achievable. It is what $1 million actually produces, and whether the number you are building toward is still connected to the life you are planning to live. That is what this video is about. The mechanics behind why the benchmark drifted, who actually has it, and what it realistically delivers when they do. My name is Alex, and if you have ever felt like you are saving correctly, still the goal keeps feeling further away, stay with this, because the math behind the $1 million target is more specific than the headlines suggest. I'm going to show you exactly how the distortion happens and how to calculate the number that is actually yours. Once you understand how the benchmark was built and where it breaks down, you will never look at a retirement savings headline the same way again. The first place the distortion shows up is in the millionaire statistic itself, and the illusion lies in how the number is counted. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The number you have been told to chase might be counting things you can never actually spend. You have probably seen the statistic. Roughly 18% of American households have a net worth of $1 million or more. That is nearly 1 in 5. And if you are someone who reads financial news with any regularity, you have seen that figure used to suggest that millionaires are practically everywhere, that the benchmark is common, achievable, almost ordinary. But before you let that number recalibrate your sense of where you stand, it is worth asking one question. How is that $1 million being counted? Because the answer changes everything. The majority of American household wealth is not sitting in brokerage accounts or retirement funds. It is sitting in real estate. For a large portion of the families included in that 18% figure, their home represents half or more of their total net worth. A paid-off house in a market that appreciated over 30 years can push a household past the $1 million threshold on paper without putting a single additional dollar into their retirement account. And here is the problem with that. You cannot withdraw 4% of your living room. You cannot pay for groceries with your kitchen equity. Home equity is real wealth in the technical sense, but it is not income-generating wealth. It does not show up in your checking account every month when you retire. Unless you sell the house, downsize aggressively, or take out a reverse mortgage, that portion of your net worth is locked. It counts in the headline. It does not count at the grocery store. So when that 18% figure gets cited as evidence that millionaires are everywhere, what it is actually measuring is something closer to households that have accumulated $1 million across all categories of assets, including the roof over their head. That is a meaningful achievement. It is not the same thing as having $1 million available to fund your retirement. Now, zoom out for a second, because the distortion does not stop at home equity. You may have also come across the figure for average wealth per adult in the United States. Currently, that number sits somewhere around $630,000. On the surface, that sounds almost encouraging. It suggests a level of financial security that feels within reach for a working professional who has been saving consistently. The problem is that averages are sensitive to extremes, and American wealth has some of the most extreme extremes on the planet. A small number of individuals, we are talking about people with net worths measured in the hundreds of billions, pull the average upward with such force that the resulting number stops describing anyone in the actual middle of the distribution. It describes a mathematical output, not a human reality. The number that describes human reality is the median, the exact midpoint where half of American adults sit above and half sit below. That figure currently stands at around $108,000, not $630,000, not anywhere close. Think about what that gap actually means. The average tells you that wealth exists in America. The median tells you where it lives. And those are two very different addresses. A regional sales director, we can call Brian, spent 26 years building a career he was genuinely proud of, consistent raises, a 401k he contributed to without fail, a house he bought in his late 30s that appreciated substantially. By most measures, Brian did everything correctly. His net worth on paper crossed seven figures. But when his financial advisor broke it down, nearly 70% of it was in the house. His actual retirement portfolio was $340,000, comfortable by median standards. Nowhere near the benchmark the headlines had led him to believe was common. Brian is not an outlier. He is the illustration of exactly how the millionaire statistic inflates, and exactly why the headline number and the retirement reality are measuring two different things. The distortion in the headline is one layer of the illusion, but once you strip away the home equity and look only at what Americans actually have available to generate retirement income, the numbers collapse even further. And that is where the funnel effect shows you just how narrow the real picture actually is. Most people assume the problem is that they are not saving enough. The data suggests the problem runs deeper than that. Take that 18% figure and start asking what it actually includes. Not as an abstract exercise, as a filter. Because every time you remove one category of asset that cannot realistically generate monthly income in retirement, the number drops, and it drops fast. Start with all assets counted together. Home equity, retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, real estate, everything. That is where the 18% lives. Nearly 1 in 5 households millionaires on paper. Now remove the home equity. Isolate only the portion of wealth that could actually be converted into a monthly income stream without selling the house you live in. That 18% drops to roughly 8%. You just cut the millionaire population in half by asking one practical question. Can you spend it without moving? Keep going. Narrow the filter one more time. Look only at Americans who have that $1 million sitting specifically inside a retirement account, a 401k, an IRA, a defined contribution plan. The assets are actually designated for retirement income. That number falls to approximately 2.5%, 1 in 40 Americans. Sit with that for a second. 1 in 40. The headline said nearly 1 in 5. The retirement reality is 1 in 40. That is not a rounding error. That is a different country. And yet the 1 in 5 figure is the one that circulates. It is the one that shapes how people feel about their own progress. It is the one that makes a 45-year-old professional with $180,000 saved feel like they are dramatically behind a norm that does not actually exist. Here is where it gets stranger. Some financial platforms currently report that as many as 22% of their users are millionaires. 22%? Higher than the already inflated headline figure. And if you encountered that statistic without context, it might genuinely make you feel like you had missed something fundamental. But that number has nothing to do with the general population. It is a textbook case of selection bias. The only people linking all their financial accounts to a sophisticated tracking platform are people who are already deeply engaged with their finances. People who have accounts worth tracking, balances worth monitoring, and enough financial confidence to want a dashboard. Measuring wealth among that group and presenting it as a benchmark is like surveying everyone at a half-marathon finish line and concluding that most Americans run regularly. The sample was self-selected. The conclusion does not transfer. This matters because the benchmarks we measure ourselves against shape the decisions we make. If you believe 22% of the population has crossed the $1 million line, your own position feels like a personal failure. If you understand that 2.5% of retirement savers have crossed it in accounts actually built for retirement income, your position looks entirely different. Not necessarily comfortable, but accurate. And accuracy is where better decisions start. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. A physical therapist, we can call Sandra, had been contributing to her 401k for 19 years. Solid income, consistent savings rate, no major withdrawals. She used a popular financial app to track her progress, and the interface showed her that users with similar income levels had median account balances significantly above hers. She started making more aggressive investment choices to close what she perceived as a gap, took on more equity risk than her timeline warranted. When the market corrected in her early 50s, the damage to her portfolio set her back further than any contribution shortfall ever had. The benchmark she was chasing was not the median American. It was the median user of a self-selected wealth tracking platform. She was racing against the wrong field entirely. The funnel tells you something important. Reaching $1 million in assets is one thing. Reaching it in a form that actually generates retirement income is a significantly rarer achievement than the headlines suggest. And understanding that distinction is not discouraging. It is clarifying, because once you see how few people are actually there, the more useful question becomes, what does the middle of the distribution actually look like? What did the typical American who saved consistently and did most things right actually end up with, and what kind of retirement did it buy them? That is the median American reality, and it is more instructive than any millionaire statistic. Here is the part nobody puts in the headline. The typical American who did everything right still did not come close to $1 million, and the retirement that bought them is worth understanding in detail. The median retirement account balance for Americans currently approaching retirement age, those between 55 and 64, sits at roughly $185,000, not per person in a couple, per household. That is the middle of the distribution for the people closest to the finish line, the ones who had the most time to save, the most years of compounding, the most opportunity to build, $185,000. Now consider what that number actually produces. Using the standard 4% withdrawal rule, the commonly accepted framework for making retirement savings last 30 years without running out, $185,000 generates about $7,400 per year. Add the current average Social Security benefit, which sits at roughly $1,907 per month, and the total annual retirement income for the median household, near retirement lands at approximately $30,300. $30,000 a year. That is the median American retirement income picture. Not a failure, not a catastrophe, but a very specific set of constraints that most financial content never bothers to make concrete. Let me make it concrete. A civil engineer we can call Raymond spent 28 years working for a mid-sized infrastructure firm. He contributed to his 401k from his second year on the job. He was not flashy about money. He drove the same truck for 11 years. He packed lunch most days. By every reasonable measure, Raymond was disciplined. He retired at 63 with $260,000 saved, comfortably above the median, and the result of nearly 3 decades of consistent effort. Raymond is not a cautionary tale. Raymond is the realistic outcome of a system that was never actually calibrated to deliver working professionals to $1 million. The contribution limits, the wage growth, the competing financial pressures of raising children and servicing a mortgage, all of it works against the kind of exponential accumulation the benchmark requires. Raymond did what the system allowed. The system just was not built to take him further. His monthly income in retirement, his 401k withdrawal, adds about $867. Social Security adds $1,820. Total, $2,687 per month, or just over $32,000 a year, before property taxes, before insurance premiums, before the water heater needs replacing. Now look at a couple that did better than Raymond. A pair we can call Paul and Diane, a school principal and a dental hygienist. Saved $390,000 combined and paid off their home before retiring. By most standards, that is a genuine achievement. 2 professional incomes, coordinated savings, no mortgage in retirement. They are well above the median. Run the numbers. A 4% withdrawal from $390,000 produces $15,600 per year. Their combined Social Security comes to approximately $42,000 annually. Total household income, $57,600. Then subtract the fixed costs that do not vary, property taxes, health insurance premiums, currently averaging over $7,000 per year for a retired couple before any out-of-pocket costs, utilities, groceries, basic maintenance on the house. Those fixed obligations conservatively consume around $38,000 per year. That leaves Paul and Diane with approximately $19,600 for everything else. Travel, helping a child who hits a rough patch, replacing a car, a medical event that insurance does not fully cover, Christmas, $19,600 for a couple who did better than most. This is what $1 million looks like as a ceiling, not a floor. For Paul and Diane, crossing the $1 million mark in total net worth, with the house included, would still produce almost exactly this outcome, because the house does not pay the bills, the portfolio does, and the portfolio has limits. Here's the thought worth sitting with. The $1 million benchmark was not designed to make retirement luxurious. For most people who reach it, it is budgeting money with better optics. The question is not whether the number is achievable. The question is whether anyone updated the math when the world around it changed. That is exactly where the retirement math starts to break. And the reasons it breaks are more specific and more avoidable than most people realize. Nobody changed the scoreboard. That is the part that should bother you. The $1 million retirement benchmark did not emerge from a careful actuarial study of what modern retirement actually costs. It became the cultural finish line gradually, through decades of repetition in financial media, self-help books, and brokerage marketing, most of it originating in the 1980s and early 1990s. The number felt aspirational and concrete at the same time. It stuck. But here is what also happened in that same period. The dollar got weaker, substantially weaker. $1 million in 1980 carries the equivalent purchasing power of roughly $3.8 million today. The lifestyle that benchmark was designed to fund now costs nearly 4 times as much to replicate. The goal stayed fixed. Everything it was supposed to buy did not. Nobody sent a memo. Nobody updated the poster on the break room wall. The benchmark just quietly stopped delivering what people assumed it would. And the gap between the number and the outcome it produces has been widening ever since. So let's run the actual math on what $1 million delivers right now. The standard framework for sustainable retirement withdrawals is 4% per year, a rate calibrated to make a portfolio last approximately 30 years without being exhausted. 4% of $1 million is $40,000 annually. Add the current average Social Security benefit for a retired worker, which sits at roughly $23,000 per year, and the total income picture for a $1 million retiree is approximately $63,000 per year. That is workable. In a low cost of living area with no major debt and good health, $63,000 a year can fund a genuinely comfortable retirement. The math holds, but only under a specific set of conditions that require almost nothing to go wrong. And things go wrong. A former regional bank manager, whom we can call Victor, spent 24 years building toward an early retirement at 62, solid savings rate, diversified portfolio, and a plan he had reviewed with an advisor. Then his bank was acquired. The new ownership restructured the regional leadership team. Victor was offered a severance package at 58, 4 years earlier than his plan required. He took it because the alternative was a lateral move to a city he did not want to live in. Here is what that 4-year gap cost him. He filed for Social Security at 62 instead of 66, claiming early permanently locks in a reduced benefit, currently around 25 to 30% lower than the full retirement age amount. For Victor, that meant his expected $2,100 monthly benefit dropped to approximately $1,530 every month for the rest of his life. The $63,000 retirement income he had planned quietly became $46,000, not because his portfolio failed, but because one corporate decision forced a timing change he never anticipated. Victor's story is not unusual. It is the version of retirement math that does not appear in the projection software. Now add the fee problem. This one is invisible in the most literal sense. It never shows up as a line item, never triggers a notification, never announces itself. If you invest $500,000 over 20 years, and your funds carry a 1% annual management fee, which is standard for actively managed funds, the compounding drag on your portfolio compared to a low-cost index fund at 0.05% is approximately $290,000 in lost growth, not fees paid directly out of pocket, growth that your money would have generated but did not, because a percentage was being quietly extracted each year before compounding could work on it. That is not a minor optimization. That is a second retirement portfolio that either exists in your account or exists in someone else's revenue report, purely based on a fee structure you probably agreed to without running the numbers. And then there is the layer that lives inside your own head. Present bias. The deeply human tendency to assign far more weight to costs you feel today than to rewards you will receive decades from now. The vacation feels real. The 65-year-old version of yourself does not. This is not a character flaw. It is how human cognition is structured, but understanding it is what allows you to build systems that work around it rather than pretending willpower alone is a retirement strategy. The outdated benchmark, the timing risk, the fee drag, the behavioral hardwiring. These are not separate problems. They are the same problem at different scales. And once you see them together, the natural next step is not panic. It is recalibration. Finding your real target means stepping off the round number track entirely and replacing a cultural myth with a calculation that is actually built around your life. The most expensive number in retirement planning is the one you borrowed from someone else. $1 million became the benchmark, not because anyone calculated what your retirement actually costs, but because it was round, it was aspirational, and it circulated long enough to feel like a consensus. That is not a plan. That is cultural momentum dressed up as financial advice, and the cost of following it without questioning it is spending decades optimizing toward a target that was never calibrated for your income, your location, your expenses, or the life you're actually trying to fund. The fix is not complicated, but it does require replacing a borrowed number with a calculated one. Here's the formula. It has 3 steps, and it takes about 10 minutes. Step 1. Take 80% of your current gross household income. Financial planners use this figure because most retirees spend less than they did while working. No commuting costs, no payroll taxes, financially independent children, and a mortgage that may be paid off. 80% is a reasonable approximation of what it costs to maintain your current standard of living in retirement. If your household earns $95,000 per year, 80% is $76,000. Step 2. Go to the Social Security Administration website and pull your projected benefit. This number is specific to your earnings history and the age you plan to claim. For someone currently in their mid-40s with a consistent work record, that figure might land somewhere between $1,800 and $2,400 per month. Call it $24,000 to $29,000 annually. Subtract that from the $76,000. Your income gap, the portion your portfolio needs to cover, is somewhere between $47,000 and $52,000 per year. Step 3. Divide that gap by 0.04. That is the 4% withdrawal rate applied in reverse, telling you the portfolio size required to sustainably generate that annual income. A $50,000 gap divided by 0.04 gives you $1,250,000. That is your number. Not a million, not 2 million, 1.25. Because that is what your specific income and your specific Social Security projection actually require. Run this for different households, and the range moves considerably. A teacher in Ohio earning $68,000 with a strong pension might find her target is $620,000. A software engineer in Austin earning $160,000 with a modest pension might find his is $2,100,000. The benchmark was never going to serve both of them. Only the calculation does. Let me show you how this changes behavior in practice. A logistics coordinator, whom we can call James, had spent years vaguely aiming at $1 million because that was the number he kept encountering. He was 44, had $210,000 saved, and felt perpetually behind. When he ran the 3-step calculation, his actual target came out at $880,000. He was not as far behind as he felt. More importantly, he now had a specific destination, which meant he could calculate an exact monthly contribution required to reach it by 63, adjust his asset allocation with a clear timeline in mind, and stop making reactive decisions based on headlines about what everyone else supposedly had. Clarity changed his behavior more than motivation ever did. Now, 3 things are worth acting on directly. First, start tracking your net worth in 2 columns, one that includes your home equity, one that does not. The second column is your retirement number. That is the one that matters for income planning, and most people have never isolated it. Second, look up the expense ratio on every fund you currently hold. If any of them are above 0.20%, run the compounding math on what that costs you over 20 years. The number will be uncomfortable. That discomfort is useful. Third, build a cash buffer of 12 to 24 months of living expenses in a liquid account outside your retirement portfolio, not invested, sitting there. This is not dead money. It is the buffer that prevents a job loss or a health event from forcing you to crack your retirement accounts at the worst possible moment. The goal was never the round number. It was always the outcome behind it, a specific monthly income, arriving reliably for as long as you need it. Once you build toward that instead, the benchmark stops being a source of anxiety and starts being what it should have been all along, a calculation with your name on it. Here's what this all adds up to. The $1 million benchmark was never a personalized financial plan. It was a round number that circulated long enough to feel like one. And the gap between what it promises and what it actually delivers has been quietly widening for 40 years, while almost nobody has updated the target. A few things are worth carrying forward. Headline wealth statistics include assets you cannot spend. The median tells you more than the average ever will. The benchmark you inherited was built for a different dollar. Fees compound in the wrong direction, just as reliably as returns compound in the right direction. And the timing of when you retire matters as much as how much you saved. The next time you read a statistic about how many Americans are millionaires, you will know which question to ask first. How is that million being counted? And how much of it can actually generate income? That question leads naturally to a deeper one. If the benchmark was wrong, what else in conventional retirement thinking was built on the same assumptions? The way Social Security is typically claimed, for instance, can add or cost a retired household hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime, and most people make that decision without fully understanding the mechanics. That is worth understanding before you get there.